All right. So, as Jason had mentioned, there's some social issues and movements that Levi Strauss Foundation has been a part of, as well as the company. And we're going to hear about some of those. But that kind of leads into some things that we discovered today, or that we shared today in some of the research that we have. Specifically, when we look at some of that research, I have to thank a partner of ours that was helpful and instrumental in making it possible, which is Influential. They were some of the engine behind some of the early analytics to try to look at the largest social issues, movements, and campaigns out there that young America is getting active on. And as we took some of their insights, it brought us further into try to understand specifically how young Americans, those 18 to 30, are getting involved in social issues and movements. And as part of that, as we go through today, you can ask some questions, which we'll get through in a minute, but as part of that analysis that we released this morning, there's some very, very key differences when it comes to our different generations, in particular, gender as well. So specifically, this morning we released the Influencing Young America to Act report, which is a second in our series overall to try to understand those influences as well as the movements that young Americans are involved with. I'm going to share 5 of the total 7 key findings just quickly for you to get an understanding of what's happening when it comes to those young Americans as well. Our first thing that we did is to try to figure out specifically what is young America talking about and what are they actually acting on. Having conversations doesn't necessarily mean they're taking action. And that was really, really important that after we had a chance to hear from Influential and others about some of those big movements and social issues, we had to go back into the field to understand what young Americans are really doing. And when it happens, it's climate change. Now, you're going to hear from an individual behind the Sunrise Movement. She'll be on stage to share some of her work and what they're trying to do to galvanize this time as we're in right now. But climate change was the issue of concern. Now, right behind that, of course, civil rights and discrimination. A lot of the work that Jason was talking about as well. Immigration health care reform was number 4, and mental health and social services, which is why we look at if you look at those issues right there, that's why we have the individuals on stage here that you're going to hear from, including the incredible work from the Ad Council, which sees the Awkward campaign, which Lena and team will talk about later on. Now, in addition to our social issues of interest, we also look at those movements that are driving change and already participation from the 18 to 30-year-olds in America. Me Too, Black Lives Matter, interestingly enough, All Lives Matter number 3, human rights, and Medicare for All. In the report, you can see how these break down by both the oldest of Gen Z and the youngest of millennial, as well as by gender too. If you don't see your issue on there, don't worry. On the website today, which you'll see on the Cause and Social Influence website, we list all of the social issues and how they fared out amongst young Americans in our study. In addition to that, we had to look at the conversation topics, right? I mentioned earlier that Influential helped us to try to understand that. And there are a couple differences when it comes to those generations. Specifically, take a look at gun rights, gun safety, gun violence areas, as you see there. The conversation and gun control was about 84% with our Gen Z population versus our youngest millennials overall. That leads us to that conversation around gender, as I mentioned. Commonalities and differences. Where we actually saw commonality is around climate and civil rights and discrimination. Where we saw differences, and we would say that there needs to be more work done, was around men and women versus Me Too and the Women's March in particular. As you see some of this, you'll want to head back to the website to look at how that fared out amongst ages as well. That's the cliffhanger part of it, so you can go there next. The next thing I would say is we try to, as much as possible, to figure out how a person starts to understand, to become aware, to then how they take action, and then we always have to ask the question in the end, do you feel like what you did for the issue really mattered? Because how many of us want to do nothing, right? And or at least act a little bit, and if it doesn't matter. And as you'll see on this is a big graphic. I just share with you 2 big key takeaways. First, the news media on social is actually a source that a lot of young Americans are using to find out and become aware on the social issues overall. The other thing is now we asked and looked at all of the actions that they had taken. And those self-reported actions, voting was the one that they believe has the most opportunity to create change. And specifically, regardless, except for in mental health, we saw it as the leading thing that they plan to do, obviously, to make social issues change and be different in the coming years ahead. We had to ask the questions around where they view the country. Is it on track or not? And what we discovered is it's not as on track as we can imagine with the study with this population. So in specifically looking at the administration, we actually asked questions, not necessarily do you agree, but rather, what do you think of the administration addressing the social issues of the time that you are of most concern with as well? And as you can see on the screen, 48% would say not well at all. Our next thing is around fake news. I'm sure you've all heard those two words used not that long ago, right? And maybe even today. We wanted to try to understand what is the attitude and perception of young America about fake news, and in particular on social issues and movements, and whether or not they view that fake news will actually be influential when it comes to the election. Specifically, what we discovered, big chart here, is about 78% of them view that fake news influences attitudes on social issues, primarily in social platforms, outside of some of the outlets we've talked about. And what we also discovered is a lot of them view that the election will be influenced by fake news on the issues that they care the most about. A little uneasy when it comes to some of that. You can head to the causeandsocialinfluence.com website to actually go to the research section, download the research, look at all of the issues and how they fared amongst our panel of Americans, a nationwide national representative panel. You'll also be able to hear in the future, we are looking at all of these movements and we'll be tracking their participation from the organizational side next. Over the course of the next year, we're going to look specifically at how these movements are galvanizing support. You're going to hear from some of those today here as well. Well, I also want you to share some of your comments freely about the research as well as what you hear here on stage. Specifically, you'll have that chance, as I mentioned earlier, to enter in the questions in our Slido account, which is wonderful for you, so you get a chance to actually ask those questions here on stage. Our moderators will have an iPad, and so anybody online or in person can ask those questions, and the top voted questions are the ones that we are going to be asking on stage as well. So you're somewhat in control away from us. Let's be friendly, all right? Let's be friendly.